Oh, hi everybody. Welcome back to Psychedelics Today. Joe Moore here, joined by Kat from SSDP. Kat, I'm going to try to say your name right. Murti?
Yeah, Cat Murti.
Murti.
Thanks for having
Great.
me again.
Thanks for joining us today. And you just got off a red-eye flight back from Arctic Visions in Alaska. Can you tell us a little bit
Yes.
about that?
Yeah, I am exhausted and invigorated. There's some really exciting stuff going on in Alaska.
Mm,
So Alaska's always been a pretty interesting state when it comes to drug policy, but the last couple years, there's been a lot more movement and some pretty positive directions. And we went up to Arctic Visions, hoping to get an idea for what might happen, what we might see in future months and years, and to engage with some of our SSDP ambassadors in the area and really help build up the grassroots organizing around ending the drug war. And man, we had just perfect timing. We were not disappointed. On the very first day that we were there, I've been doing a lot of quick turnaround flights. So I got there last Thursday, and just around the time that I touched down, we got great news that the lieutenant governor had certified a new ballot initiative. This is
mm,
the Alaska Natural Medicine Act. It's just a fantastic grassroots, indigenous led, veteran led, community led piece of legislation that really has everything in it. It's modeled a little bit off of the Colorado system, the Colorado decrim bill, but
yeah.
while it has decriminalization of psychedelics for possession, for growing, for gifting, for consumption, but it's not just that. It also helps put in a medical model for access to licensed health practitioners. It also puts in it creates a brand new board for Indigenous leaders to look at faith-based practices, and it creates protections for Indigenous and faith-based practices.
Mm,
And just really, it's fantastic. It's exciting. It's really, in many ways, a first in the nation bill. It's something that the majority of Alaskans have said that they want in the past, and I'm really excited for what we're going to see. There's just such energy on the ground there. Getting to talk to folks over and over the last few days at this Arctic Visions conference and in the local community around Anchorage and some of the towns around there. Um, Alaskans are just incredible people. They're very self-reliant. They're very tied to the land. They care about their history, but they're also very patriotic. They're really an interesting political microcosm. And one thing that's true about Alaska is there's a great resilience there, and there's great resilience because this is a state where people have put up with a lot of hardship. It's called the last frontier. Um, and we see, and they really showcased at this Arctic Visions conference, which was wonderful. You heard from folks from all sorts of different backgrounds. There's a lot of trauma in that state. There's a lot of difficulty. They've faced some horrific mental health concerns as a result of the veteran populations there, as a result of high foster care. A lot of folks grow up in foster care, are separated from their families. A lot of folks grow up in poverty. There's a lot of subsistence hunting or farming that
mm,
happens in Alaska. And these people have found there's very high rates of depression and suicide. And I heard from so many people about how they had found hope and healing from psychedelics and how excited they are to get to move forward with decriminalizing use, but not just that, creating new models for use, creating new ways of looking at legislation, of looking at policy that kind of protects and bakes in some of their traditional indigenous spiritual practices while also clearing pathways for innovative therapies, things like ibogaine that are really getting a lot of excitement across the nation. So it was just so incredible. I haven't slept in 4 days, but I feel amazing.
I love that. It's exciting to know that Alaska is doing it differently. when they were kind of launching it, they had a really interesting spontaneous kind of launch in Colorado a bunch of years ago to get a lot of us kind of clued in. And I was surprised it was happening at all. And then I was even more excited to find out there was a lot of indigenous leadership there, and got to meet Gina and David from their team and a few others from the team. And it's just really exciting to see what they've done in such a short period of time. And
It
mm,
really is. It really is this community driven thing. This is not some outside consultants or something like that. This is folks in Alaska. This is folks who are indigenous themselves, folks who served in the nation's military, veterans with PTSD. This is folks, several folks who grew up in the foster care system, several folks who, are Native Alaskans and Alaskan Natives working together to, really build out solutions for their community that I think are really rooted in their community's unique needs. But what's really cool about Alaska is that while this piece of legislation is uniquely Alaskan, I think it's really got something that's baked in there for everybody. There's a lot of um, there can be a lot of infighting within the psychedelic policy movement, like with all policy
mhm,
movements. Get a bunch of nerds together, they start
right.
to fight over which is the best model, what's the right way to do something. Well, what's really cool about this piece of legislation is that it would bring in so many of those different models, and it really gives everybody a piece of the pie, a different approach based upon, we talk about set and setting, we talk about how different individuals need different things. And I think that the Natural Medicine Alaska Act, the Alaska Natural Medicine Act, really kind of approaches all of those things and gives us a chance to try across the board. Now they have a hard road ahead of them. So right now they've just been certified a couple days ago. They have up until the legislature closes in January, the legislative session, January, to get all their signatures to be able to get on the ballot for 2026. And Alaska's got a kind of a funny system. They need 10% of eligible voters from the last general election to sign, but they can't, despite the fact that most of the population is in places like Anchorage, they actually need to get folks from at least 30 of the 40 legislative districts in Alaska, some of which are pretty remote, many of which you can't drive to. You have to take a plane or a boat. And of course, Alaska is kind of ending its summer season soon. For the Alaskans out there, the fireweed blossoms are starting to fall off, and so the days are going to be getting shorter. The nights are going to be getting longer. Right now, it's you get sunset 11:30, but in a few months, it's going to be 2 p.m. things like that, and so that really makes it a little bit more difficult to get those signatures,
Mm,
especially for a grassroots model like this. They've really fought hard, but this is a labor of love, not of big money. And so, this is something that 68% of Alaskans have said that they want. I'd love to see those Alaskans get out there and volunteer and get a few signatures and put that petition in, put that signature gathering petition in the front desk of their office where they work, putting something out there, telling folks at church or telling folks at the grocery store, at your book club, hey, we've got a real opportunity here to be a model for public health for the
mm.
whole country and to help Alaskans at the same time and really get excited, get invigorated. Because I do think that what we've seen so far, the fact that they've come so far, has been truly a homegrown grassroots effort. And the way that we're going to get this across is by that community continuing to come out in support.
Um, can you give us like this is a little too technical, but I just want people to kind of understand what does it mean to be certified for like a bill like this?
Got you. Yes. So basically, at this point, the Alaska government has approved that this would be legal, that it is now, that it meets all the criteria, and that provided enough registered Alaskan voters come out in the right districts, come out and say that they're in support and they want to vote on this,
Mm,
it is ready to be voted on. But the process in Alaska is a little complicated, as it is with a lot of different ballot measures, and so the fight up until now has been to get the language out there, to get something that folks can come out in support of. And now it's their chance to actually come out and support, sign, put their name out there saying, hey, we should have this on the ballot. Alaskans have the right to say what they think about these policies that affect all of us so deeply. And then once they do, we'll hopefully see it on the ballot in November of 2026 for the next big election.
Mm. Yeah, that'll be fascinating. I imagine coming in, they were probably, well, they're probably still really got a lot of work ahead of them and are really stressed. But going in, they were like, this is, we're here. We made this mark, but now we have so much further to go. Is there like a obvious, like, kind of call to action for folks in Alaska who want to support this?
Yeah, I would say go check out Natural Medicine Alaska and make sure that you sign. I'm sure that they'll be having stuff about where they'll be collecting signatures, but definitely volunteer. We need boots on the ground if we're going to get this passed. And it can be very simple. It could be something as simple as just, hey, yeah, I'll grab this and get some signatures for my group of friends. I'm going to this party. We're all going to go hang out at this bar, Blarney Stone, whatever it is. And, I'll just bring this petition and ask folks, hey, this is important. This is out there. But honestly, just spreading the word, letting people know that this is an opportunity to help address many of the mental health issues that we've seen in Alaska, but also to, help remove some of the crushing stigmas that surround the war on drugs, help prevent these situations. When I was in Alaska, I heard from so many people who had really heart-rendering stories about growing up in foster care because their parents had been put in prison for growing mushrooms or growing cannabis or consuming cannabis or mushrooms or things like that. And their lives were torn apart. They grew up in foster care. That creates a whole lot of different problems. There was many people who suffered from abuse within the system. And then, of course, Alaskans, one of the most common professions there is in the military, and so there's a lot of veterans who, had suffered from great trauma either overseas in combat, or many who had, especially some of the female veterans who faced sexual assault in the military and had PTSD from that, and this is something that really could help address all of those problems and also, create a new model in Alaska, really show how forward thinking Alaska is and have that really Alaska led approach, right? What I love about this piece of legislation is not just that the folks who wrote it, the folks who've been pushing for it, are the folks who have been most impacted. But this has a really innovative and interesting approach when it comes to the difficult balance between a medicalized model of psychedelic therapy.
Hmm.
We think about things like, science and having a psychiatrist sitting in a certain office and things like that, versus some of the real indigenous religious and spiritual uses, which are very different, but also equally have a lot of value and are even more effective for certain other people, as well as really, Alaskans are self-sufficient people, and a lot of them, they grow their own food, they hunt and fish for their own food. That's their lifestyle, and this bill would also give them the opportunity to grow on their own,
Hmm.
to be in possession and remove the criminal justice element from that, so that law enforcement in Alaska can focus on real crimes, some of the real concerns we've seen with disappearances of women and things like that, rather than getting in the way of people trying to make a better life for themselves.
Hmm. I'm kind of curious. I love doing economic chat with you. This like idea, and this is a little abstract, so bear with me. There's this idea in the zeitgeist around kind of um well, twofold, right? Medical system's amazing. Medical system is totally corrupt. Medical system has all sorts of like perverse incentives built in. And this is kind of a sort of hedge against that. in a way, because like perverse incentives are restricting this kind of innovative medical approach from getting implemented in states actually taking it upon themselves to kind of implement. Any thoughts there on that kind of rant?
I don't even know where I start with that one. I mean, incentives definitely matter, Joe.
Hmm.
And,
Hmm.
you said there's a debate about one, two, or three, and really it's kind of all of the above, right? Like there is a lot of really incredible stuff that's coming out of labs right now that's coming out of traditional educational centers like Johns Hopkins University, the University of California, Berkeley, other places where they're really relying upon science and traditional medicine, traditional psychiatry, psychotherapy, in order to come to really identify how psychedelics can impact and help and harm individuals and what's the best approach. But it's certainly not the only approach. I think that there's also like so many different factors at play there. So I do think that this bill kind of aligns us in a way that we can approach the two of them. And if I can speak to a bit of a larger picture outside of simply the legislation, this was a something that I really saw shine through at the Arctic Visions conference. It was an incredible conference. It was kind of a small community led thing. There's about 200 people there who were really leaders in this space, folks who were really excited and trying to change the world. Many of them from other states, the lower 48, as they call it there, but also many folks from Alaska. That was really the majority of the audience. And what I liked was the talks themselves were a pretty wide array that both had those lived experiences, those personal approaches that explained really why this was such a big issue, why this is particularly such a big issue in Alaska, and how people are finding hope, how people are finding healing, and why they're so passionate about this. But we also had scientists coming up there and sharing things, and scientists like Simon Ruffle, who had just a very interesting talk about his own work, where he comes from a psychiatry background. He does work as a scientist, but he's also got an anthropology background, and now he's studying to be a curandero. And so he's been looking at some of this from various perspectives and really trying to integrate the scientific and the spiritual perspectives together. And I think that that's an innovative approach that I saw carried across the conference, and that I think really imbues the spirit of this movement in Alaska and the excitement that I see coming up around this ballot initiative as well.
Mm. Yeah, thanks for that. I do appreciate those kind of like multiple ways of knowing approaches getting blended together. Like Simon, for instance, and I think I remember Joe Tafur doing something like that, Fellowship of the River in the past as well.
Mhm.
So it's lovely to see that this is kind of coming. It's kind of like a little bit more integrative, if we can do that
Yes, that's the
skillfully.
right word. Yes, it is very integrative, and that's so necessary, especially because I interviewed Hamilton Morris on stage at the conference,
Mm.
and we talked about a number of different things. We talked about journalistic ethics, particularly when it comes to um, drugs and psychedelics in particular. But we also talked about how small of a movement we really are, and the behemoth, the hydra that is the war on drugs, because it does pop up in all these different ways. And
Mm.
as a movement, I've been doing this work now for almost 20 years, Joe, and
Yeah.
the movement has grown so big, and that's wonderful. It's a big tent. We've brought in so many different people. We've brought in so many different perspectives. We're just in a different place. We now have like dispensaries. We have tests for all sorts of things we didn't previously have. We had all sorts, we have just incredible science that we didn't know about 10 years ago. But I think that there's also been sort of a splitting where we see a lot of infighting that happens because, everyone feels like, okay, well, this is not the perfect way that I would have done it. And it's too
Hmm.
easy to forget what we're up against, right? That this is a billion-dollar industry that is built up around locking people in cages for daring to explore ideas of cognitive liberty, for daring to pursue new or different ways of exploring their personhood, of finding cures for the things that hurt them, that harm them in their world. Um, for completely nonviolent so-called crimes, right? And that is ongoing. We're continuing to see new drugs getting scheduled every day. We're continuing to see people get locked in cages. I mean, I know I say it to you every time, but but we have 600 people arrested for marijuana every single day in this country.
Mm.
People think that, I can drive to a dispensary, and about 80% of Americans are within driving distance of a dispensary right now, right? That's wonderful. But who else is right by those dispensaries? There's people who are serving life sentences less than a mile away from a dispensary that handles more product on a given day than they are locked in a cage for life for being around, right? And I think that it's important that we remember this larger picture and understand the necessity for us to really work together to kind of shed that sort of infighting, shed those petty grievances that come about just as you being humans who are hyper focused on something and have a plan for how it should go out, and then get frustrated by the difficulty of working with other humans and realize what's really at stake here.
What could you expand a little bit about journalistic ethics and psychedelia? Like, obviously, there's taking money from people and not disclosing it. There's kind of having equity and like hyping something, kind of like what we see in crypto and like some stock market stuff that's a little fraudulent.
Yeah.
What kind of stuff did you guys get into?
So those are both really key issues that definitely come in play. There are issues of who gets paid to do what. I know that we've seen that come up even with some of the coverage and some of the stories around MDMA scheduling. And we most lately there was what was previously a pretty open secret and now is a confirmed secret that a lot of people got paid money to uh, come out saying that they were members of the psychedelic community, but then really their job was to make sure that MDMA did not get FDA approval. Right. And so, I mean, I think that that definitely happens. But I think there's also just the structure of how modern journalism works. Like, if you are a reporter, you generally speaking have to produce 8 to 9 articles a day, right? You need those articles to get a lot of clicks. I mean, it depends on what you're doing, but if you're writing for a traditional newspaper, you need those articles to get a lot of clicks. You've got a constant click count, you know what you're getting. And so you have to write something that's really fast. You have to write something that's going to be fairly sensationalist. Um, and you just don't have that much time to do those deep dives, to do that investigative work, to really confirm the narrative. And so I think that that's a big concern. When you hear about things like, oh, fentanyl is murdering people, like, that's a big story that's going to get a lot of clicks whether when you put it on or not. And it's much harder to have that discussion of, yes, there is an actual pretty large problem with fentanyl in this country and a lot of people are dying, but let's actually look at the numbers and let's see what's happening when every time we can say that it's okay, so let's get rid of opioids, but every time we crack down on opioid prescribing, deaths go up. We can look at it and see, okay, most people who are dying of fentanyl overdoses didn't want to be doing fentanyl in the first place, but are acquiring it accidentally in other substances, many of which they're only choosing to use because they can't get better, safer, legal substances on illicit market. So what's causing those deaths to go down? Well, the ability to test those drugs, the ability to have uh, opioid overdose reversal agents like naloxone, and then we're attacking those things because we're upset about fentanyl. And I think, like, a lot of that, the journalistic coverage of these things matters. I think that there is also, unfortunately, that same incentive, the need to drive clicks, the need to drive your name. It can be easy to lose sight of the long-term picture and really chase a story that in the short term you think is going to get a lot of excitement, that is going to get a lot of clicks. but you don't think about in the long term, how is that going to impact drug policy overall? How is that going to impact
Hmm.
the ability to move forward pieces of legislation that could really hurt people or harm people? And I think we saw that, for example, in the coverage of Measure 110 in Oregon that really got panned in a huge way, and I think a really irresponsible way. A lot of the journalists pretty much were parroting what some politicians wanted to say, blaming, scapegoating Measure 110 for houselessness, for mental health issues in Oregon, which we know have been endemic to the state for decades, and which have been worsened by things such as just really restrictive zoning policies and a lack of access to affordable housing and things like that. And but that's a much harder picture to write. That's a much more difficult story to turn around in an hour when you've got a press release that says like, hey, here's this sounds sensationalist, and I know it's going to get clicks, it's going to get views, it's going to get shares.
Yeah, for sure. I've been kind of critical of a lot of this. Even allies, like deep allies, they'll sometimes take a little bit of a shortcut, and I'm just like, guys, like that's a really pro drug war subject line. What on earth are you doing? Like, I understand you have to pay your rent, but like, is that worth the cost of kind of
What's the
not
long
being a good
term?
comrade in this fight against the drug war? Like,
And I do
yikes.
want to say too, Joe, because I think that this is a big problem. I think also
Hmm.
people, they understand how the drug war works when it comes to one substance that they work with, but then all of a sudden, when it comes to another substance, they don't carry over that logic. They don't kind of examine it in the same way. They're just like, oh, but that one I've heard is scary, so not that one then. So I think that happens. But I do want to say on the flip side of this too, I think there is also a danger of over promising and then inevitably under delivering, right? Because there are
Hmm.
no magical snake oil cures. I've said a lot of really positive, glowing things about the healing potential of innovative therapies, whether it's with MDMA or psilocybin or ibogaine or ayahuasca or any of these things, but none of these things is a guaranteed cure for anything. None of them is going to be the right thing for everybody. There are, there's a lot of issues of making sure that you're in the right place mentally, that that you're physically the right candidate for this, that you have the right family history, that you process it in the right way, that you're in the right moment of your life, and honestly that you don't go back to a community that's going to suck you back into the exact same problems again, right? And I think that
Hmm.
like when we don't discuss that at length, when we don't give the whole picture of like, yes, actually this is really amazing, this could help in lots of different ways, or even even things like, yes, ending prohibition, I would say, is on net going to be amazing and do all sorts of very good things for our economy, for our society, for our community, for public health, for all of these things. But there will always be some there will always be some trade-offs, there will always be some negatives, and I think that if we completely refuse to acknowledge those, not only do we set people up for failure who, really maybe like they're suffering from substance use disorder, they're suffering from treatment resistant depression, they're suffering from PTSD, severe PTSD. They've tried many different things, nothing's working, and they pin their last hopes on, well, but this will do it for me. And they go out and they gather a bunch of money and they go to a retreat. They pay $8,000. They spend 2 weeks. They lower a lot of those walls that were protecting them from trauma, and then they come back into the same environment with the same people where they felt stuck already. There's no processing. And then something happens and they have another incident. They go back to chaotic drug use, whatever it is, and they really feel they failed. They feel like this was the one thing that was going to do it and I couldn't do it. And that puts them in a worse situation, that increases the likelihood of overdose, that increases the likelihood of suicide, right? So I do think that there's a level to which overpromising hurts people like that, but I think it also hurts us as advocates, as people who want to end the war on drugs, because if we sell this glowing nirvana-esque picture of like everything will be amazing, the streets will be paved with gold, no one will ever have a substance use problem again, everyone is just going to be so mentally healthy, there'll be peace and love in the world, all war stops tomorrow, whatever it is.
Mhm.
um, well, you can pass a piece of legislation and all that doesn't happen the next day. People get really, really disincentivized. They get turned around, especially those folks who were never huge advocates, but were just like, yeah, you know what? I don't think people should be locked in a cage because they used a medicine to treat a condition that they had, right? And I think that's a lot of people. It's about 68% of Americans across political parties when it comes to psychedelics, between 80 and 90% of Americans on cannabis. Most of those people, yeah, they want to see decrim. They want to see people not going to prison for this anymore. But if you sell them this glowing evangelical picture of what this will look like, and then the day after they vote, everything isn't fixed, they now don't believe you for any other law. And I think that we've faced a lot of pushback after Measure 110, after Massachusetts. And I think that the Alaska team is really going to struggle against those same negative perceptions, which is really unfortunate because neither of those cases was a result of bad policy. Those both were good bills that would have helped people a lot, but they have been victim to a lot of bad communications and a lot of bad press around it. And I think that particularly when we're talking about what's going on the ground in Alaska, I'm a little bit worried that it's going to be an easy story for a lot of reporters to write to try and tie it to Measure 110, try to tie it to Massachusetts, and really drag down what is an incredible opportunity that is, I would say, for one of the most innovative pieces of legislation and one of the most and something that the voters themselves are asking for, that they want, that they've worked really hard to get this far.
Incredibly hard, right? It's like no joke. It's like really no resources in Alaska. Like Massachusetts, like irresponsible spending probably is kind of what I came down to with it. Like TV ads, come on. But like I think, yeah, the recent so you're kind of commenting on the recent Portland State University study on Oregon a little bit here about the decriminalization initiative that it's clearly decrim was not responsible for the deaths. It was many other causes like
Exactly.
COVID, homelessness, etc. Yeah,
Several several studies that
yeah.
look at this. And that's the point too. Like, how often you kind of have to get into the weeds. You have to be a drug policy nerd to even know about that, right? Because you don't
Hmm.
hear that. What you do hear is Oregon decriminalized all drugs, which they kind of didn't really even. So that's in and of itself its own problem. But Oregon decriminalized all drugs, and then a bunch of terrible things happened. That's not true, but that's the narrative you hear all the time. And you don't hear about this Portland study. You don't hear about any of the other pieces of research that have shown that, like, that was just, it happened to coincide with the same time that the fentanyl wave hit Portland. It happened to coincide with a number of ongoing issues that have been happening around occupational licensing and zoning in Oregon that has really harmed their economy. I mean, there's just so many other things that have happened there, but we don't hear those arguments nearly as much or nearly with as much excitement from folks.
Yeah, absolutely. And um yeah, it's tough and it's I'm with you. Like we can't overhype, but we need to be sharing with as much nuance as we can. There's an article I read this morning about the TikTokification of science and how it's dangerous. It's like, oh, you just want like this little soundbite that sounds amazing and challenging, and then you're like, oh, I can now challenge all of science in this
Yeah.
particular space.
So I have very mixed feelings on this. I'm not a scientist. I do hang out with a lot of them, but I was for a very long time. My job was pretty much to do that, to take research, mostly economic, but policy research, things like that. Oftentimes, like a 200-page book or 300-page book, and make it into viral. internet content, right? Which oftentimes,
Mhm.
especially in the more modern era, is an 8 second or 12-second TikTok video or right.
Mhm.
And I think that there's a real value in that because, you know, if your approach to ideas, if your approach to engaging with other people is to say read my book, like, you've lost them, right? They really need those little crumbs of information, and I've been a huge internet evangelist for a long time. I'm one of those elder millennials who kind of grew up pre-internet and then post-internet, and so I love the way that the internet has really democratized information, that we can get
Mhm.
access to information in a way we never could, that we can share information in a way that we never could. And we can find communities that we never previously could do. And yet, a lot of people have really moved in a very negative direction with that, whether it's the hyperpolarization that we've seen, whether it's like this increasing issue with people just tuning in, getting that 8 seconds, but then never digging further, letting that 1 8 second clip that they saw that now increasingly might even be completely fake news generated by an AI bot somewhere, right? And letting that be the one piece of information that sticks in their head forever. And I don't think that that's new, right? A
No.
lot of people believe all of those drug war myths from the 1800s, 1700s. People still believe some of those things, and so it's not new that false information gets trapped in someone's brain, but it is new that pretty much anyone can instantly become a purveyor of information to millions of people. And it is new that we can generate whole photographs, we can
Mhm.
generate whole videos, and they're getting better and better and better, and that makes it makes harder to figure out what's true and what's not, particularly in a world where journalists are actively incentivized not to spend too much time digging into a story and to just keep cranking out more stuff and looking at what another publication has put up and just try to pull from theirs and increase it because you need to get something out faster than them within tenths of a second, right? And so I think it really
Mhm.
goes both ways.
Yeah, yeah, I'm with you that, like, it's essential. It is science comms, it's policy comms, but, like, how do we do it with integrity and skill such that it doesn't mislead people to help them go down the wrong
And it's
pathways?
so easy
Yeah.
to do that. It's so easy
Mhm.
to do that.
Absolutely.
And what, I get frustrated with some of these algorithms too is, starting in 2016 with the 2016 election and the whole Cambridge Analytica stuff, we started to talk about fake news all the time. And um, the social media companies like Meta that, let's face it, are really the biggest news purveyors, period. That's where most people get all of their information is from these online resources. They get it from places like WhatsApp or Instagram Reels or TikTok. Um, and the sort of like safeties that they started to put on for fake news um do nothing about fake news. They really don't. But what they do is they make it harder for independent journalists, for advocates, for folks like that to be able to compete. They're the folks who constantly are getting pushed out. But a bad actor who genuinely doesn't care, who wants to put out fraudulent information and pop up in one place, then another place, then another place, somebody who's got the wherewithal to, submit 100 complaints and take down a bunch of pages and make sure people don't see certain information. The algorithmic system that is supposedly keeping us safe from fake news actually incentivizes that behavior. And so that's a real frustration of mine. So I did say I'm an internet evangelist. I still am, but I think that there's some real alarm bells that should be ringing for folks on how the ecosystem, when it comes to the purveying of information, of knowledge, really goes these days.
Yeah, absolutely. It's, it's alarming. It is alarming, and, yeah, with these, like, very large lawsuits coming at journalistic outfits, like, it's really and, I should point out that it's very difficult for psychedelic companies to get liability insurance for things
Oh,
like slander, I've been sued, still being sued. So like it's quite the project to put yourself out there, and we actually don't cover things as a result of not having that kind of
Yes.
insurance.
No, that's exactly, and we know this, and we know that this is ongoing. Like, it's even come up with in our own ecosystem. People are really scared to say certain things because they're worried about how they'll be threatened. And even with, for
Hmm.
example, the MAPS MDMA fiasco with trying to get the MDMA FDA trials, a lot of journalists have expressed openly or a lot of times behind closed doors that they knew a lot of the bad stuff that was going on to try to prevent MDMA from moving forward as a legal therapy. But they were facing NDAs, they were facing legal threats from pretty wealthy individuals, just to essentially be able to control that information. And so I doubt that that's the only place that that's happening. I think it happens everywhere, and it's a concern.
Absolutely is. Yeah. So do you like your organization, you were working towards sensible drug policy, and like this idea that um press should be empowered so that we can tell the truth and talk to policy experts like you and not necessarily feel repercussions right now, because I'm feeling like, I'm feeling vibes such that I don't know how long I'm going to be able to do this,
Yeah.
in terms of like government pressure, like I might have to leave or something, or the company might or something. I don't know. Like, do you,
I mean, even just little things like you mentioned, it's difficult to get insurance, right? Like,
hmm
this has been an ongoing problem with folks like one of the former, there's a range. Like, one of the former editors of High Times Magazine had to step down because he faced losing custody of his daughter for being the editor of a magazine about cannabis, right? But it's also little things like these. You get shut down from banking, you get shut down from running any sort of fundraiser, you get your account shadow banned, you spend years building up a following because you need that on these social media platforms, and then your account gets shut down the next day because you said something that people didn't like or you used a word like Narcan.
Oh boy. Yeah. And it's interesting to like balance this. Like, I've spent an incredible amount of money with Meta, and I feel like a total fool for having done that. It
Yeah.
was a workable thing for a little while. We were able to sell some programs and it worked. But, with zero accountability, total impunity, they can just say, "Nope, you're no longer going to get prioritized." Like I've been shadow banned like for years now. 107K, we're just like stuck. And then
Yeah,
years
and
and
what's
years.
frustrating too is that you can't even get the word out about that because where are you going to do it?
Right. And last week I spent 12 hours on Google Ads trying to advertise like a breathwork workshop, zero drugs, zero
Uh-huh.
drugs, and all for naught. Like I can't even.
Google's recently tightened their AdWords um, rules around drugs, and I've struggled with them for years. I don't do this
Hmm.
so much anymore, but that's my background. I used to do digital for all of this stuff, and I struggled with them for years. Where just simply mentioning policy would get you flagged as selling drugs, and your whole account gets shut down. You have to deal with getting it unfrozen. It's a code violation to talk about the opioid overdose crisis, like all sorts of things. It's just like this is necessary information. And that was all happening when there was actual human individuals who were reading and screening this stuff and deciding what would get blocked. And now it's mostly AIs that learn off of it previous behavior. So we're really setting it up so it's just going to get worse and worse unless we step in and do something big.
Right. Yeah. So I explicitly harmful. I kind of framed the Meta situation as like, okay, Meta is pro drug war and pro drug harm if they're not going to allow us to have these conversations. And it seems like a lot of these major kind of tech oligarch platforms are going that way. Um,
Yeah. Um, I do worry about that. I think that the arc of our society kind of moves in more free and less free directions over time in a bunch of different ways. And I think when it comes to drug policy, we've seen a lot of positives that are coming about. You know, the fact that we've got stuff like this thing happening in Alaska, like you know, we're seeing we've got, I told you, the majority of this country now has quasi legal marijuana. I'm not going to say it's legal because people still go to prison for it, so it's not legal, right? But quasi legal, we've got all these kinds of things. You know, well, now there's movements to recriminalize, right? All sorts of things, whether it's, for example, in Massachusetts is now pushing to recriminalize cannabis. This is a bill, the sense of the, which I would say is distinctly not sensible policy, but has been deemed as sensible approaches to cannabis. This is a bill that we know that Kevin Sabet and his little Shop Smart have been shopping around to states for a while now, trying to make sure that we can recriminalize cannabis, that we can make sure even more people are getting locked up, even more kids are losing the opportunity to go to college, losing the opportunity to succeed in life, making sure we can lock more people out of mortgages and jobs and really kill our economy, because that seems like some good policy right there, right? And I have no doubt that the reason that, because we know that he's been shopping this around for at least a year or two, it's showing up in Massachusetts because that bill measure unfortunately failed. Question four unfortunately failed. And they know that it's been really messy with the grassroots there for a bit. And that puts us in this weak position. And it's a great time to strike, right? But you're going to see a lot more criminalizations like that happening, or attempts to criminalize, whether it's stuff like the recent announcement from the FDA that they from the DEA, FDA, and HHS together had a joint press conference, along with, ironically, the Kratom, some of the Kratom Association folks. And forgive me if it wasn't Kratom Association specifically, but I mean people who were involved with Kratom, to criminalize 7-0, which is the active agent inside of Kratom. And so you see a lot of this. You see the infighting with hemp and cannabis. There's a lot of genuine threats that are coming, and I think that we are moving in a very real way into a somewhat less free environment. I do think that we're at a freer point now than we ever have been in all of human history, and that's a real positive. And I say this as a woman of color. Like, I would not choose to live anywhere in the past, right? Like, I 100% think that we live in a better society now than we ever did previously. However, um, that progress, the march forward, is not guaranteed. And there's some real threats that are happening, whether it's around censorship, whether it's around recriminalization, and really some of the walking back of those hard won fights that we put so much time and energy into, or whether it's you know, all these other things. And that really underscores why it's so necessary for people who are worried about these things, people who want to see a freer future for all individuals, need to set aside some of those petty disagreements and really focus on pushing for full decriminalization of all drugs, for making sure that we have health-based options, you know, scientific-based options and policies to some of these big mental health problems, issues like substance use disorder, and that we're actually creating a world in which people are able to pursue the things that they need to pursue, whether that's information, whether that's health, whether that's a job or a place to live or anything like that. And I think that there's a lot of negative direction that we're moving in as well, and it's a real concern.
I was chatting with a friend who is raising money for psychedelic ventures, right? And like historically, this person's been on kind of the side of Carl Hart, kind of this like, how do we just get rid of the scheduling system to a degree? But you know, conservative because, you know, money, but also, you know, shifted opinion
Oh,
somewhat recently, saying
yeah.
like,
Conservative just meant like free markets. It unfortunately does not, but
yeah, like what is it? What is it? It's interesting in that like one or two kind of bad experiences can say like, oh no, the psychedelic drugs are better and the only way forward is medicalization, not decriminalization. Like how do you like to kind of dance around this kind of topic these days because you just got back from a psychedelic conference
Yeah,
and
I did just get back
yeah.
from a conference, and actually, this is one of the topics that Hamilton Morris and I discussed on stage was sort of this delicate balance, right? Because I can tell you both from a personal perspective and also as the executive director of SSDP, we support decriminalization of all drugs. We like to say legalize people who use drugs, right? Because that's really what it is. You're not really criminalizing drugs, you're criminalizing the people who use them, who produce them, who live around them, and whose communities will be torn apart by attempts of enforcing those drug laws, right? Um, so decriminalization is so important. However, medicalization, that is a pathway towards legalization, a pathway towards not decriminalization in that sense, but certainly removing some of those crimes. I think where it's important, where that balance comes, what SSDP's approach to this has been, is that we support any initiatives, pieces of policy, et cetera, that move us in a direction away from the war on drugs, away from prohibition, away from stigmatization as a model for approaches to drugs and drug use, provided that they do not create any new drug crimes, right? Because I think that there is a real yeah, we see this like I just mentioned with kratom versus 7-OH, or the split between hemp and cannabis, which I laugh at every time because it's the same plant. It's the same plant. That's what we're talking about here. And it's the same thing with 7-O and kratom. 7-O is literally just a part of kratom, but now we're doing
Hmm.
this weird song and dance and pretending that we need to have two different sets of laws against them. And so when it comes to hemp, for example, some people will say like, "Oh, this is unfair because hemp, they found these loopholes. They're not as regulated as the legal cannabis industry. So they need to face all the same things." No, we should make cannabis as free as hemp. We don't need more criminalizations, right? Because those hemp markets that we've seen, those aren't hurting people. And in fact, we've seen even in places like Texas where they attempted to recriminalize hemp, people came out, and really conservative people came
Hmm.
out saying this is
Yeah.
absolutely not what we want. We do not touch our local hemp economy. We want this, right? And the governor had to veto because of the tremendous pressure on them. And shout out to all the folks down there. A lot of SSD peers worked on that one, but um yeah, I think that we're gonna see that hopefully, if the grassroots comes out, if people come out, because what we know from polling is that individuals want to see that decrim. I think medicalization is a model that gets us closer to there. I think it is also helpful. What one of the insights that Hamilton had was when he was covering SSCP's DOI DOC hearing at the DEA. Those kinds of arguments that surround things like science and around things like medicine, even though we know for a fact that the DEA does not care about those things, right? The reason that they've most recently recommended, and let me be clear, it's not been adopted as a rule yet, but recommended that they move forward with scheduling DOI and DOC Schedule
Hmm.
1, despite the fact that they themselves say that they agreed with us that it'll cause irreparable harm to scientific and medical research, right? But they still want to move forward. But the fact of the matter is that they're also finally the only evidence that they're interested in considering is that scientific and medical research, right? And so like things like these medicalized models, first off, they can be the best model for certain people. A lot of people, that's what they're going to benefit from the most, is they want to go to a psychiatrist and sit down and do a drug and do the talk therapy, and that's going to be the approach that works for them. And for other people, it's going to be that they want to go to their curandero and they want to pray together and they want to do more of a community based approach. I mean, there's so many different models, and each person needs something different, but um, that medicalized model doesn't just help the people who want a medicalized model, and it also doesn't just create pathways towards legality. It also actively provides the evidence that we need in things like these hearings, because without that model, it's really impossibly difficult to bring up anything that we can use to change these policies and move towards more of a decriminalized mindset.
Mm, I love that. Um, and let's see. I think it's an interesting time right now. You live in DC, right?
I do.
Um, yeah, so good luck. But I think it's like an interesting time because in a few days, a lot of kind of interesting folks are heading to federal land in Nevada to do Burning Man. And like there's a lot of federal agents there. There's a lot of BLM. There's a lot of parks and interesting folks. And it's just
Bureau of
like
Land
really,
Management. I'm just going to clarify that
yeah,
for
Bureau of Land Management. Thank you for clarifying. And
people in the city of
um,
soup, but I know not everyone knows what all the agencies are because there's too many of them.
there's so many, yeah, a little bit too many for my taste. And I think um, one of my favorite Ron Paul lines. It's like America has a really serious gun problem, and it's like something about taking, yeah, too many federal agents have guns. Thanks,
Yeah,
thanks, Ron.
and the
Um,
number of times that they use them to throw smoke bombs into a baby's crib or whatever because someone might have been smoking weed. I think he's right.
yeah. So this is interesting because Nevada is state level recreational legal for cannabis, but Burning Man happens on federal land, and a lot of people think there's no cops there to begin with, and there's a crazy amount. And then, secondly, oh, it's Nevada, you can smoke weed there, not legally, and not without kind of really serious consequences. So, I just kind of, I'm curious, do you have any kind of perspectives on this? Kind of,
Yeah,
and
I
it's not
no,
Burning Man isn't like a cannabis festival,
it
right?
really comes back to that piece about journalistic ethics and the way that we've talked about these issues. And this is something that we were fundamentally very concerned about at SSDP a few years ago. Was that the number one obstacle we found to cannabis legalization was that people already thought that cannabis was legal. It is not legal. It is not federally legal, and it is not legal to do most things that people are doing. Those state-based legal systems, they're sort of legal, but they're not really. The feds come in and raid them all the time. They can't bank. They can't do things like that. So then we had this whole conversation about rescheduling. People are still in prison. Not just are people still in prison, they're still going to prison all the time. I'm gonna do it again, Joe, but I just think this is such an important fact. 600 people are arrested every single day in America for marijuana. About 92% of those are for simple possession. That's it. That's it. People go to jail for this all the time, and everyone thinks that the issue's done. People still aren't able to buy a house because they have a marijuana charge from 35 years ago. This is very much still an issue, and it's something that we've worked hard to remind people of. And I think because of that, we've been able to finally start to get some movement at the federal level, but it's just not there. It's not there far enough. We're not seeing anything. There was a lot of attention around the rescheduling fight, and it's worth mentioning even there. And let me be clear, the marijuana does not belong in Schedule 1, period, right? A Schedule 1 drug has no accepted medical use. The vast majority of medical associations in this country have said that marijuana has approved medical use. We have thousands of years of history, like thousands of, tens of thousands of scientific studies, and in the majority of U.S. states, people are being recommended marijuana by doctors to use for medical purposes, right? Like that is a legal farce. Marijuana absolutely does not belong in Schedule 1. But there was the same thing where people are saying, oh, we're going to legalize marijuana. Well, if you move it to Schedule 3, it still doesn't make it legal. It doesn't make it legal to possess. It doesn't make it legal to grow, to buy, to sell, to consume. It doesn't even make those dispensaries legal because none of them are FDA approved, and they're not selling FDA approved materials, right? And so I think that there's just so much misinformation about this, and it's just not being properly addressed, not being properly talked about, and that's it's just so key because that's the biggest obstacle we've had to moving things. And I think we've had the opportunity to really get out and talk to folks like you who are helping get the word out there. But when we go in and we meet with folks in Congress, and we've met with every single Senate and House office at least twice in the past year to tell them that that folks continue to want and that we need cannabis to be federally legal. We need everybody who's in prison for cannabis released, and we need their all those charges cleared so that folks are able to get jobs, buy houses, be PTA moms, like go help with their kids' field trip, get a college education, just basic things that we're keeping a huge amount of our population out of, right? And even then, we have these conversations with them and they tell us, look, we know that the majority of Americans, both Republicans and Democrats, want marijuana to be decriminalized. We know that our
Mm-hmm.
constituents want them, but we don't think that any of them want it more than they want anything else. And so we just simply don't feel the pressure to move on this, especially because we think that as soon as we do support something, we will get criticized for it. And we're not getting any accolades for working on it because no one thinks it's an issue. And so I think that is honestly one of the biggest problems here is that even with psychedelics, people think that like, you go to these conferences, you go to things like this, and a lot of people are living in sort of like a la la land world where they don't even think about criminal justice. I think it's much newer that we're getting more of that approach where it's like, yes, it is. There's incredible science happening here, but what happens outside of that science? And I think the DOI DOC fight for us really underlined that for a lot of folks because here the DEA is trying to criminalize two substances that have been used in labs safely for decades since the early 70s that aren't being found outside. There's been zero emergency room visits ever. They're being used for things like medical and scientific research into issues like substance use disorder and anxiety and depression and pain and inflammation and even cancer. And we're trying to criminalize that and shut down the research. And how do we do it? Well, because no one knows about them. No one knows this is an issue.
Mm-hmm.
And even the folks who are doing that research are so tuned out of the policy conversation that they don't know that their research is under threat. And I think that that's just been such a big part of this because unfortunately, everything we do is very politicized. I would love to live in a world where we can pretend that it is not, but it is. Every single moment, every single little thing in your day, there is a law that is governing that. And if you don't take an
Mm-hmm.
active interest in what those laws are and how you can change them, it is very easy to lose control of things that you think you are free to do that you are in fact not.
Right. Yeah. It's really important. And the fact that scientists aren't aware is just bonkers to me because they could just absolutely require 20x the funding to do the same research. And that's not really great. 20x is probably a little hyperbolic, but like a lot more cost.
It's going to be a lot
Um,
more cost, a lot more difficulty, right? Yeah.
hmm And, for no good reason other than some people for their career need to see check boxes. Look at this success so I can get a promotion or whatever it is, right? Like it's just it's not really a system that works for us. And
No.
scientists should be on top of that and be aware. And a thing we miss, like basic serotonin research, like amazing. These drugs are really amazing for that too. So the fact that the feds are anti-science, this kind of like goes into how
Surprising
can we
that none of these policies have ever been science-based.
no like how do we build trust? And it's through kind of like there needs to be some sort of what do they call it, symmetry, um congruence between behavior and thought and like posture and
Uh, cognitive dissonance, right? That's
mhm,
yeah, no, I mean, and it's a really big issue even when you talked about stuff like TikTok, right? All people need to do is they need to see that one article, they need to see that one video that tells them some false information about the latest like drug that's going to make you into a zombie that eats flesh or whatever it is. And those are actual scares. So I don't know if you remember like the bath salt scare where they were calling it like the zombie drug or
right.
like that.
Hamilton debunked it for me somewhat recently where it's like not actually, it was actually
Not a
like
thing,
something
but
totally
all
different.
these news articles all over were talking about how
Hmm.
like people were taking bath salts and then eating people's faces off and things, right? And that's like a pretty visceral image that is stuck in people's brains, and it's not as if they then go and check out the science, like, and then you can tell them science afterwards, they don't care. That's what that means to them, right? And I think that, like,
Hmm.
that is a huge problem. There's so much sensationalism, and the way we consume our information. Sensationalism, there's we talk about this golden age of journalism where it was just all truth and stuff like that. That never existed. It's always been propaganda. It was controlled by just a few companies. Now, well, then we had the golden age of the internet, perhaps, where everybody could create information, but you couldn't find any of it. And then the companies came in and started organizing it. Now we're back to a few companies that really have that ultimate control, that we have more people creating the information. And we're having that same problem where you really need to be able to sift through and figure out what's true and what's not. And people are inundated. There's more video uploaded to YouTube in a day than you will ever be able to watch in your lifetime, right? Like, it's just, you can't watch all of it. It's all out there. And so people get tired and they just don't have time to fact check everything, and they're just going to grab whatever information they heard. And so it's really incumbent upon all of us who care about truth, who care about science, who care about the way that things are or should be, to, do our part to share that message, and not just on these platforms, but to have those conversations with people in our lives who care about, and to talk about these things and do it empathetically and do it in a way where we're not mocking them, we're not cutting them off, we're just simply having conversations about, well, actually, I do believe that this is important and here's why. And, yeah, it sounds crazy if I tell you something like legalize all drugs, but actually it would be beneficial, and actually it would result in fewer substance use problems, in fewer broken families, in better in a significantly better economic situation, and more opportunities for young people, in less crime. Um, and
Hmm.
here's why.
Right. Well, Kat, I really appreciate you joining us for this one, especially after a red eye flight. Anything,
Talk to you, Joe.
anything you might want to include?
Yes, I'm gonna say I just want to give a big congratulations shout out to Gina Randall, David, Josiah, Noria, Jason, everybody who worked on the team with Natural Medicine Alaska. This is absolutely incredible. I'm so psyched and so honored to have gotten to spend time meeting with Alaskans this last week, and really hearing from them about how important these issues are, and how much they really need something like this. It's such a huge win that Natural Medicine Alaska was able to get this ballot initiative certified. And we really, really need Alaskans. We really, really need folks, the grassroots, the people who care about these issues, the people who want to build a better Alaska, want to build a better America, want to build a better world, to get out there, to make sure that that they volunteer for the campaign, that they can sign up, that they can help get it on the ballot, so that Alaskans can tell their government what we already know from the polling they support, that they want to see psychedelic therapies and decriminalized, that they want to see access to both a medical model as well as a traditional spiritual model, as well as a grow your own home grow type model, right? And I think that we've seen support for all of these things. It's a really unique opportunity, and I'm just so excited to see how things shape up there.
Amazing. Kat, thank you so much. Everybody, check out SSDP. It's important, and just really hope we can keep the momentum.
Awesome.
Until
As
next
always,
time,
thank
Kat.
you, Joe.
You got it. It's been so